It took just 42 seconds. The room, packed with congressional aides, attorneys, and cameras blinking red, fell into a silence so sharp it could cut through steel. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't raise her voice. She didn't point, accuse, or grandstand. Instead, she calmly turned to Kash Patel and asked one question, just one. He blinked, then swallowed, and in that instant, as if on cue, the entire committee stopped breathing. What was in that folder? The man who once walked war rooms with power now looked like a child who'd been found out. And in that moment, truth didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived in the silence. Because sometimes power doesn't shout. Sometimes it waits. In a woman's voice, steady and unwavering, demanding only the truth. This story is a dramatized account inspired by real tensions, real hearings, and real emotions felt by millions. The characters and moments you're about to witness may be fictional, but the fear, the courage, and the silence, those are very, very real. And now we begin. The double doors of the Oversight Committee creaked open with the kind of reluctant groan that made people glance up even if they didn't want to. Cameras snapped to attention. Staffers froze mid-whisper. And at the center of that sudden stillness, she walked in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, calm as morning fog, a thin maroon folder tucked neatly under one arm. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She just walked. Behind her eyes, sharp, unreadable, was the kind of silence that unnerved men used to owning every room they stepped into. Her heels clicked softly across the linoleum, each step measured like punctuation in a sentence she hadn't spoken yet. At the far end of the chamber, Kash Patel leaned back in his chair with the looseness of someone who believed today would be a breeze. His cufflinks gleamed. His smirk widened as he tilted his mic slightly away, the casual posture of a man preparing for sport, not scrutiny. "Didn't know TikTok congresswomen made it to oversight," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for the mic to pick it up. A few chuckles broke the tension, quiet, almost guilty. One aide snorted and looked down. AOC didn't blink, didn't turn her head. She didn't give him the dignity of a reaction. Instead, she walked the final steps to her seat, placed the folder down with surgical precision, and opened it. The committee room wasn't ready for what followed. She slid a single page from the folder and laid it flat on the desk before her. No rustle, no flourish, just the soft sound of truth making contact with wood. The page was blank on the back, but on the front, visible only to her, and in a moment to him, was something that would shift the entire rhythm of the hearing. She didn't speak yet. She didn't need to. The tension wasn't in her voice, it was in her silence. A deliberate, coiled stillness that made everyone else feel like they were talking too loud just by breathing. Across the table, Kash shifted slightly, just a twitch, barely perceptible. But it was enough. The room felt like it had tilted ever so slightly. The chairman's gavel hadn't even fallen yet, and already the mood had changed. Something unseen but very much present had entered the room. It wasn't just the folder. It was what it represented. And everyone on some level felt it. What could be so damning that AOC, never one to waste a moment on theater, would walk in wordless, let herself be mocked, and answer not with a comeback, but with a page. A staffer in the third row checked his notes, then looked up again. Then, without thinking, leaned slightly forward. A journalist in the press section scribbled something quickly. The camera crew panned, then zoomed slightly. Even the congressmen who typically tuned her out were now watching, silent, curious, unsettled. AOC finally looked up, not at the chairman, not at the crowd, but straight into Patel's eyes. And for the first time that day, he looked away. The laugh he started with had disappeared, replaced by a quiet awareness that something wasn't right. Something had changed, and nobody, not even him, saw it coming. "I want to be very clear," Kash Patel said, adjusting the microphone with 2 fingers, his voice now less playful, more measured. "At no point before March 15 did I have any communication with Mr. Devlin or his office. Any assertion otherwise is either a mistake or an outright fabrication." He leaned back, folded his hands over his stomach, and nodded as if to confirm his own statement. Silence followed, not because the room agreed, but because everyone was watching her. AOC didn't speak right away. She didn't even look at him. Instead, she gently turned the page in her folder and slid a new sheet forward. Her eyes stayed on the paper as if she were double-checking something no one else could see. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights and the occasional camera shutter. Then, without warning, she lifted her gaze and spoke with a voice that carried no anger, only precision. "Mr. Patel," she said, "can you confirm that this is your email address? K. Patel America, secure.org, and that this is your signature at the bottom." She held up the page between two fingers. Kash squinted, then frowned. "If you'll allow me to see the document, I will, of course. But for the record, you just stated under oath that you had no communication with Mr. Devlin prior to March 15th. "That's correct. That is correct," he said, his tone tightening. AOC turned the page to face the chairman, who leaned forward to inspect it. She then handed copies to the clerk, who distributed them methodically, each page like a silent accusation, landing with a soft slap on polished oak. Then she read, "From K. Patel America, secure.org, to J. Devilinegovaccess.net, dated March 12th, 9 to 14 a.m. Subject line, content release timing, quote, strongly recommend delay the upload until narrative is stabilized. Too many eyes right now. Let me coordinate messaging," end quote. She let the words settle like dust on marble. No one moved. A long, thin breath escaped someone in the gallery. Chairs creaked slightly as lawmakers shifted, some leaning forward, others stiffening in place. Kash Patel's hands, once folded confidently, now twitched a barely noticeable adjustment. He blinked. Then again, the tension in the room congealed thick as molasses. AOC didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice or flash a victorious smile. Instead, she gently laid the page flat on her desk, smoothed its edges, and looked directly at him. "I want to make sure the record is clear," she said. "That email was sent on March 12th, not March 15. That's 3 days prior to the timeline you just swore to. It references coordination delay and narrative management in direct connection with Mr. Devlin's digital release schedule." Patel leaned forward, now elbows on the desk. His face had lost its color. I don't recall that exact message. Would you like to revise your testimony?" she asked. Voice still calm, but now slicing. The chairman interjected. "Mr. Patel, you are reminded that knowingly providing false statements before this committee is a federal offense." For a split second, Patel looked like a man trying to recall whether the room had any exits behind him. There were none, only faces, watching, waiting. The silence returned denser now, the kind of silence that made reporters scribble faster aides hold their breath, and political veterans remember hearings past the kind that signaled blood in the water. And across the table, AOC just waited. The room had barely recovered from the March 12th email when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez flipped to a final page in her folder, one that looked less formal, less structured. It wasn't printed on committee letterhead. It wasn't an email. It was a black and white screenshot, encrypted, pixelated, time-stamped. She didn't look at Patel this time. She just spoke. "For the record, Mr. Chairman," she began evenly, "this committee has also obtained communications via Signal, provided by a protected source. The messages are dated March 13th and 14th and appear to involve Mr. Patel." The shuffle of bodies in the chamber stopped. AOC continued, her voice still low, still steady, yet now carrying an eerie gravity. Quote, "Don't worry, she doesn't know where the call log lives." End quote. A sharp inhale, not from AOC, not from Patel, but from someone in the rear of the room, cracked the silence. All heads turned to Kash Patel, whose mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but no sound followed. Chairman Reyes sat up straighter. "Congresswoman, do you have that documentation available to the committee?" "I do, sir," AOC replied, handing a fresh set of copies to the clerk. "It is anonymized for the protection of the whistleblower. However, the message's recipient was verified through metadata and routing. We can authenticate under closed session." Reyes nodded slowly, then turned to Patel. "Mr. Patel, would you care to respond to this message?" Patel looked stunned for a moment, then scoffed softly, not confidently, but reflexively. "I mean, come on," he muttered, trying to mask his discomfort with another forced smirk. "Anyone can send a Signal message. We don't even know if that was me. This is just... It's speculation. It's a circus." But no one laughed with him. AOC finally looked at him. Not accusingly, almost sympathetically. "Almost. The reason we brought this up, Mr. Patel, is because it seems this message was sent just hours after your last confirm contact with Mr. Devlin, and it implies not only awareness of potential exposure, but also deliberate concealment. That raises serious questions. Before Patel could fumble together a rebuttal, Chairman Reyes tapped his gavel once. This committee will recess for 15 minutes. Staff counsel, please prepare to confer regarding next steps in document handling. As mics were muted and cameras powered down to stand by, the press pool at the back erupted into whispered chaos. Chairs scraped, phones buzzed, and in the middle of it all, Kash Patel let out a small shaky laugh. Not loud, not arrogant, just unsettled. The kind of laugh that happens when the body forgets what else to do. One photographer caught the moment Patel caught mid-laugh, his eyes scanning the floor like it might open and swallow him whole. And just behind him, barely in frame, AOC standing motionless, watching not just with the confidence of someone who had done her homework, but with the poise of someone who knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning, because the call log still lived somewhere, and she already knew where to look next. Long before the headlines, before the hearing room turned silent, and Kash Patel's smirk slipped, a woman in rural Vermont zipped up her parka and drove 2 hours through sleet to a nondescript facility tucked between a forestry reserve and an abandoned train line. Her name was Laura Inez, 56, retired systems analyst, quiet, deliberate, and invisible by design. For 30 years, she'd worked on defense-grade server infrastructure backups, hidden mirrors, analog to digital redundancy chains most people never knew existed. And on that particular Tuesday, she was doing a favor. The government contractor she once served had kept her on call, not for politics, not for profit, just in case someone needed the only woman who still remembered how to calibrate the pre-2010 secure nodes without frying the fiber. That day's task was simple: replace a grounding unit in a near-obsolete off-site server hub that had survived a merger, a flood, and a very quiet reclassification. But what Laura found while rerouting a voltage test wasn't simple. Behind a firewall that hadn't been patched in 7 years, buried under orphaned file structures and mislabeled containers, was a backup log, untouched, unflagged, and still timestamped. Its title was meaningless: Sikvex delay, audit.wav. But when she previewed the first 20 seconds, her fingers froze above the trackpad. It was a voice, male, familiar to her faintly. Delay the upload until after she testifies. No, I'm not worried she's too green. Just keep the chain off public record. A second voice answered lower. What about the call log? A chuckle. Relax. She doesn't even know where it lives. Laura closed the file. She didn't tell her husband. Didn't log anything. She copied the file to an encrypted flash drive, rebooted the server, finished the grounding repair, and drove home. For 3 days, she didn't sleep. She sat in the kitchen with her coffee, staring at that drive like it was radioactive. Her husband thought she was just having another tech headache. He didn't know that inside her mind something long dormant had stirred. She'd voted every cycle since '92. She'd watched hearings. She'd believed more or less in the process. But she also remembered the ones who had lied under oath and gotten away with it. And now here in her hand was something different. Not proof of guilt, not yet, but proof of fear. The kind of fear men with power didn't show unless there was something real at stake. She didn't trust anyone local. But a week later, when Laura saw a clip on the evening news, AOC confronting Kash Patel in committee, she paused. She didn't know much about Representative Ocasio-Cortez, except that she didn't flinch. That mattered. So she mailed the drive anonymously, no return address, to AOC's Washington office, with a single typed sentence folded inside backup, wasn't fully erased. Use this wisely. No signature. No expectation of thanks. Just a systems analyst from Vermont, retired but not asleep, who knew that sometimes democracy doesn't need heroes. It needs witnesses who don't look away. And while the package traveled quietly through postal sorting centers and federal scanners back in Washington, the timeline Patel thought he'd erased was about to come roaring back, one restored fragment at a time. The package didn't look like much, just a plain brown envelope. No markings, no stamps, hand-delivered to the security desk outside Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's D.C. office on a rain-slick Tuesday morning. It arrived between a fruit basket from a union rep and a box of flyers accidentally sent from a district office. No one noticed it right away, but the intern who finally picked it up, Aaron's second-year Georgetown student, with a knack for cybersecurity, felt a pulse of unease when he shook it lightly and heard the soft plastic click of a flash drive. There was no letterhead, no sender information, just a single folded slip of printer paper inside with 12 words typed cleanly at the center. This should have been destroyed. I couldn't. Use it carefully. No greeting, no threat, no ask. Aaron placed it gently on the edge of the desk in the communications bullpen. 20 minutes later, AOC's chief of staff, Melinda Rhee, saw it and frowned. They had protocols. Run a scan check metadata, keep it offline. But Melinda had a sixth sense about political landmines, when to tread lightly, when to lean in. She called over the legislative assistant who handled their investigative flow, a soft-spoken analyst named Darnell, who used to work for the GAO. By 2 p.m., they were in the basement of the Capitol Visitor Center in a secure terminal room, nicknamed the Vault. Darnell inserted the drive into an air-gapped laptop, loaded a sandbox environment, and watched as a single file tree populated. 4 folders, no titles, just timestamps. Inside were raw, .wav audio files, export logs, and most curiously, PDF fragments of what appeared to be transfer records. He opened one at random. It showed a chain of custody receipt from a digital asset archive dated March 11th. The file name was Transcript HB11 in full, and at the bottom right corner were 2 handwritten initials, KP, Kash, Patel. Darnell blinked, then clicked another. This one was a redacted transfer form showing an internal request for media isolation, standard procedure for sensitive data, but it had been logged under a non-government ID tag and listed an external IP block routed through a third-party cloud vendor. Private mirror, Darnell whispered. This wasn't supposed to touch federal systems. Melinda stood still listening as the first audio file began to play. Crackling at first, then voices. Patel's was unmistakable, confident, directive. So delay the upload at least 48 hours after her statement. We'll shift the timeline if the leak window's still unstable. A second voice, nervous lower. And if they ask for logs, Patel again. Then we didn't keep them. We buried the chain. They don't have a path. Melinda paused the playback. The silence in the room felt pressurized, not from fear, but from the awareness that this changed everything. They now had something far more dangerous than hearsay or innuendo. They had the metadata, the silent fingerprints no one expects to be traced. The audio, while damning, could be questioned. But the logs, the initials, the time-stamped file paths connecting Patel's voice to a real data structure, those were the digital equivalent of DNA. This is a live chain, Darnell muttered. Whoever sent this, they've handed us a loaded grenade. AOC wasn't in the building when the drive arrived, but within the hour she was en route reading a secure summary from her phone as her driver navigated across Independence Avenue. Her pulse was steady, but her jaw tightened. She didn't know who sent the package. She didn't know why it had surfaced now, but she knew exactly what to do next. The air was different when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez re-entered the hearing room. The same lights, the same microphones, the same committee seal hanging above the dais. But something unseen had shifted like a weather front rolling in behind her steps. Reporters glanced up from their notepads. Staffers whispered behind folded folders. Even the security detail along the back wall straightened their posture. Kash Patel was seated as usual in his tailored navy blue suit. Confident posture, fingers, laced chin slightly elevated. He was mid-sentence answering a procedural question from Reppers Harrison when the murmurs began at the door. He looked up and saw her. AOC walked directly to her seat, a thin black folder in hand. Her expression was unreadable. Calm but not passive. Sharp but not hostile. She didn't interrupt. She waited. When the chair nodded her in, she leaned forward into the mic. Mr. Patel, she began, her voice clear but deliberate. I'd like to ask you a direct question. He shifted slightly in his seat. Proceed, he said. She opened the folder slowly, like peeling back the final layer of a gift no one wanted to receive. Do you deny that this voice, she tapped the page, locking eyes with him, is yours? And then she pressed play. The recording was short, less than 9 seconds. Delay the upload at least 48 hours after her statement. No name, no context, but the tone, the cadence, it was unmistakably him. Patel didn't answer, not immediately. He stared straight ahead, then blinked just once. His lips parted slightly, but no words followed. The silence was nuclear. Then from the end of the bench, his attorney rose halfway from his chair. "Madam Chair," he interjected, "we strongly object to this ambush-style presentation. My client has not authenticated this so-called evidence, nor been given access to review its origin." "You'll have your time to respond," the chair cut in, "but the Congresswoman has the floor." AOC never looked at the lawyer. She just repeated the question. "Mr. Patel, is that your voice?" The second silence was longer than the first. Then finally Patel exhaled. "I'm not able to verify recordings I haven't personally reviewed, and under advice of counsel, I decline to speculate." AOC tilted her head. "So you're not denying it?" Another objection, louder this time. The chair banged the gavel twice, but the murmurs had already begun. In the hallway, the press pool exploded into movement. Headlines were forming mid-sentence. Cameramen scrambled toward the door. Assistants clutched phones to their ears. Inside, Patel's composure was intact, but his voice had vanished. And across from him, AOC sat silently watching, not with anger nor triumph, but with a steady patience that unnerved even those on her own side. She didn't need to win the moment. She just needed to ask the question that would live longer than any answer. It was a gray Thursday morning in D.C. when AOC stepped into the secure briefing room beneath her office floor. The walls were thicker down here, lined with acoustic panels and silence. Her staffers had been buzzing all morning, but now only the soft hum of the encrypted monitor filled the space. On screen, waiting with a half-smile and arched brow, was Dr. Marcia Lynn, a woman who didn't believe in speculation, only verification. Dr. Lynn, 48, was a leading expert in digital forensics and metadata authentication. MIT-trained, NSA-vetted, and known across 3 continents for her ability to read silence as clearly as sound. "Let's get to it," she said without greeting. "You wanted confirmation. You got it." AOC leaned forward. "Is it real?" Lynn adjusted her glasses and pulled up the waveform. "Your clip matches a private call captured off a subcontractor's mirrored server node. Someone tried scrubbing it, but they missed the edge files." Time-stamped March 10th at 7:42 p.m. EST. That date hit hard. It wasn't just before Patel's testimony. It was 5 full days before he claimed any communication had taken place. AOC crossed her arms, lips pressed tight. "What exactly is being discussed in that call?" Lynn didn't flinch. "He's advising someone unidentified on this end to delay upload logs and initiate an audit cleanse on Site 3. Site 3, VA Field Office. Northern Quadrant." AOC nodded slowly. She remembered the map. That facility handled digital transcriptions, surveillance metadata, call record overlays, and classified routing logs. If access logs were wiped there, it wouldn't just cover up a conversation, it could erase the breadcrumbs of an entire operation. Lynn wasn't finished. He also uses a code phrase, "scrubbing the linens." That's what triggered our flagged vocabulary algorithm. It's one of 6 red flag euphemisms for digital destruction. And the voice match AOC ass still not blinking. 98.7% acoustic confidence. Add to that spectral harmonics cadence regional stress, it's him. AOC sat back. For a moment she said nothing. The room seemed smaller now, heavier, as if the truth had its own gravity. Dr. Lynn, meanwhile, tapped another window. "But that's not all. There's metadata attached to the call. The audio packet originated on a secure line rented via Black Cedar Consulting, Patel's known shell firm, from 2 years ago." The link was damning. "You're saying he didn't just make the call, he used a back channel, prepped it, and timed it before he ever showed up to testify?" "Exactly." A long silence followed. AOC let the weight of the revelation settle not on her, but within her. This wasn't just a lie. It was a premeditated orchestration wrapped in procedural arrogance, and now it was unraveling by the thread. Finally, she asked, "Is the evidence chain clean?" Lynn smirked. "I've already notarized the packet-embedded digital signatures and prepared 3 clean mirrors. This isn't going anywhere, not without burning down 4 data centers and a few satellites." AOC let out a low breath. "Then it's time," she said quietly. "He didn't just lie under oath, he engineered the lie, and now the lie is speaking back." Before ending the call, Lynn added, "You'll want to act soon. These kinds of truths have a short shelf life until someone tries to replace it with noise." The screen went dark. The hum of the room returned. AOC didn't move right away. She stared at the closed laptop, her hand resting over the lid, as if sealing something sacred inside. What had begun as a routine hearing had now cracked open a corridor of rot. But she wasn't afraid of the dark, not anymore. Because now she had proof, and proof in the right hands had a pulse louder than any denial. It started with a voicemail. The raspy voice of an older man crackled through the phone line into AOC's district office in the Bronx. No name, no preamble, just a message that lingered long after it ended. I fought in Quezon. Lost 2 buddies before I turned 20. We didn't serve to let this kind of lying run free. Keep going, Congresswoman. Some of us are still watching. The intern who retrieved it, a 20-something named Reggie, stopped mid-click. He replayed the message 3 times, then brought it straight to AOC's chief of staff. Within hours, dozens more like it flooded in. From a retired school teacher in Boise who remembered covering Watergate in her civics class. From a coal miner's widow in West Virginia, her voice shaking as she said, "This feels like back then, only worse, because now they think we're too old or too tired to care." From a preacher in Alabama who quoted scripture before ending with, "Truth has no party." The calls weren't coordinated. They were raw, real, spontaneous outpourings from older Americans, many over 60 who had seen history bend and break before. And now they were recognizing the signs again. By midweek, over 17,000 emails had arrived in AOC's inbox. Not pre-written petitions, not political spam. These were paragraphs typed by trembling fingers, full of personal memories, private griefs, and quiet outrage. A former Marine from Arizona even attached a scanned photo of his service medal. In the subject line, he'd written, "This is what we earned, not cowardice in a suit." AOC sat alone in her office one evening, scrolling through dozens of them. Her eyes burned not from exhaustion, but from the clarity of it all. These weren't just citizens. They were veterans of justice, mothers who marched in the 60s, grandfathers who cast votes during Jim Crow, nurses who'd whispered truth in dying ears during the AIDS crisis. Now they were looking to her, not for spectacle, but for accountability. Her team began printing selected letters and posting them along the hallway wall. Every morning, aides paused to read them before heading to work. By Friday, it became known as the Wall of Echoes. Yet not everyone welcomed the rising tide. News segments began to split along sharp edges. One cable host rolled his eyes and mocked the geriatric brigade riding to AOC's rescue. But that only backfired. Within 12 hours. A group of older viewers launched a digital counter-campaign under the hashtag #WeStillServe. A video went viral of a Vietnam vet in a wheelchair outside his VFW hall in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. He looked straight into the camera and said, "This isn't about left or right. It's about right and wrong. And if Congress can't remember that, then maybe it's up to us to remind them." The Capitol began to shift in tone. What had started as a single exchange between AOC and Kash Patel was now a public reckoning echoing through rotary phones, home desktops, and hearts still carrying the scars of battles long fought both abroad and at home. In the silence between the headlines, one thing was becoming clear. This wasn't just her investigation anymore. It was theirs. And the country was no longer watching quietly. It was speaking. The morning of the continued hearing arrived with a strange stillness. Capitol staffers moved quickly but cautiously, and reporters gathered outside room 216, glancing between their notepads and the committee schedule. Everyone knew something had shifted. No one knew exactly how much. Inside, the air was electric. Patel's attorneys sat with clipped movements, eyes darting toward the press gallery, then to the rows of spectators, and finally to the wall-mounted C-SPAN cameras that had broadcast the first session into millions of homes across America. When Patel leaned into his microphone, his voice was firmer than expected. "Mr. Chairman, I respectfully request that portions of this hearing, specifically those relating to alleged metadata and recordings, be entered into sealed record. These materials are sensitive, unconfirmed, and potentially misleading to the public." A flicker passed through the room. AOC sat still, hands folded, until the chairman asked if she had any objection. She did. "Mr. Chair, I must object on behalf of the American people. When powerful individuals hide behind the word classified, they're not protecting the country, they're protecting themselves. These materials were obtained legally and verified by experts. We owe the public full transparency." The room held its breath. The chairman, a seasoned moderate with a reputation for balance, nodded slowly. Request to seal the full hearing is denied. However, we will allow restricted access to exhibits during technical testimony. The proceedings remain open to the press. The compromise was enough to proceed, but not enough to keep the lid on. Because 15 minutes after Patel's legal team stepped out for a closed-door sidebar, an 87-second clip, raw, unedited, appeared online. It showed AOC holding up the flash drive envelope and saying this wasn't leaked. It was entrusted. Someone believed the truth belonged here, not buried under procedural shadows. Within hours, the clip had been re-uploaded over 400,000 times. It aired on local affiliates in Missouri, in late-night reels across California, and as the lead story on a veteran-run podcast in Florida titled, "Truth Has No Expiration Date." Hashtags ignited, hashtag show the hearing, hashtag censor no more, hashtag trust the people. And then came the fury. A retired judge from Pennsylvania tweeted, "If we could televise Watergate, we can certainly handle Patel squirming under oath." His post was shared by a former Secretary of State. Even C-SPAN, typically neutral and procedural, issued a quiet statement on social media. Clips surfaced today were not officially released by our team. However, we stand by the principle of public access to governmental proceedings. Everyone knew what that meant. They'd leaked it, and they weren't sorry. In a matter of days, Patel's push for secrecy had done the opposite. It turned a complicated metadata argument into a moral line in the sand. The more he sought to seal, the more the public demanded to see. The Capitol wasn't just under scrutiny, it was under a magnifying glass held by millions of people who had grown up watching presidents fall, civil rights rise, and who refused to go quietly into the digital night. AOC didn't need to say much in those days. The country was speaking for her, and Kash Patel, once a smug, once composed, now looked like a man running out of places to hide. The hallway outside the Oversight Committee chamber was quieter than usual, but not silent. Reporters lingered like shadows. Phones buzzed with alerts. Rumors fluttered through every corridor of the Capitol, and AOC knew what was waiting behind the oak-paneled door of the private meeting room on the second floor. Inside, three party leaders sat already, two from her own caucus, one technically unaffiliated but influential. There were no smiles, no water poured, just glances exchanged. The moment she entered, the door shut with a thud that echoed louder than the room's silence. It began civilly enough. "Alexandria, we want you to understand the bigger picture here," said Senator Hallstrom, a senior figure from the Appropriations Committee. "This Patel situation, it's becoming a distraction. You've made your point. Maybe it's time to pivot focus on housing, climate, your strengths." AOC didn't sit yet. Her jaw clenched, but she didn't speak. She was used to these dances where the music was always composed by caution and self-preservation. "There's back-channel concern," another added, "that if you press further, the narrative becomes about you versus national security, or worse, you versus due process." That's when she sat, slowly, calmly, and answered in a voice low, steady. "With respect, this isn't about me, and it's not about left or right. It's about the truth. If our committees can't hold someone accountable for doctoring records and misleading Congress, then why have hearings at all?" The youngest staffer in the room shifted nervously. One of the senior leaders sighed. "You're making powerful enemies, Alexandria. We don't want you to get politically isolated." Her eyes didn't flinch. "Then maybe isolation is the price of integrity." There was no response to that, just silence. Disappointment, perhaps, but also something deeper, fear, not of her, but of what would happen if she didn't back down, and prove them all complicit by inaction. After the meeting, she stepped into a private corridor. She expected to find her aide Mara waiting. Instead, she found Kash Patel. He was leaning against the railing, arms crossed, an eerie calm in his posture. The smile on his face wasn't joy, it was performance. "You're making quite the show of this, Congresswoman," he said. "I'd advise you to tread carefully. What you're suggesting, it's not just slander, it's actionable." She met his gaze squarely. "You're threatening to sue me?" He didn't blink. "Defamation, yes. Conspiracy, too, if your little Vermont whistleblower story keeps spreading. Don't think for a second the public won't believe I'm the victim of political theater." Her expression didn't shift. "You're welcome to sue me, Mr. Patel, but the truth doesn't need a lawyer. It just needs a microphone, and I have one." For a moment, neither of them moved. Behind her, the echoes of the closed-door meeting still rang. Behind him, the storm of public attention still grew. And somewhere between the two, the fragile bones of democracy trembled. He stepped away first, the sound of his footsteps hollow against the stone. She stood a moment longer, then turned and walked toward the committee chamber. Toward the truth. Toward whatever came next. Not because she wanted to be a hero, but because silence in moments like this was just another form of surrender. The headlines shifted from scandal to spectacle. Patel's allies, sensing the heat, launched a full-blown counteroffensive, slick hair-polished talking points, and just enough outrage to fill a week's worth of primetime interviews. This is nothing more than a political witch hunt, a former cabinet member snapped on Morning Line. AOC is weaponizing whispers. There's no substance, only ambition, claimed a strategist on Real America Today. The media looped those phrases endlessly. Witch hunt, smear campaign, political theater. But behind the scenes, things turned darker. AOC's team stopped using their office address for mail after a package arrived with shredded pages soaked in red dye. Her communications director, Imani, reported a man lingering near her building, muttering phrases like, "You'll see her burn for this." Capitol Police upped surveillance but didn't promise much. It's background noise, one agent told her off record. Welcome to the cost of being visible. But it wasn't noise, not to Mara, her longtime aide who'd begun sleeping with the lights on. Not to AOC's younger interns who stopped tagging her location in posts. Not to the dozens of constituents who wrote in saying "stay safe" instead of "thank you." She pretended to brush it off. But late one night, standing by her apartment window, with only city lights for company, the gravity of it sank in. They were afraid. Not just of Patel, but of truth becoming dangerous. The next day, AOC paid a quiet visit to her mentor, Gloria Reyes, a retired Bronx judge in her late 70s with sharp eyes and sharper wisdom. Gloria had seen it all, the protests, the setbacks, the mockery women endured when they raised their voices too soon or too loud. They sat across from each other at a small cafe tucked beneath the L tracks, the kind of place where time didn't hurry. "You look tired," Gloria said. AOC smiled, a hollow one. "They're calling me un-American, radical, a media addict." Gloria sipped her tea and said nothing. "And people are scared. My staff. My mom. I can't blame them." Gloria set down her cup, eyes firm. "You don't carry the torch to be safe, Alexandria. You carry it so others can see." That stopped her. The words pressed into her like truth always does, quiet but irreversible. "You think this is worth it?" AOC asked. The judge didn't blink. "I think there's a generation watching wondering if courage is still real. Show them it is." On the walk back to her car, AOC noticed her hands had stopped trembling. The attacks hadn't stopped. In fact, Patel's team pushed harder, buying ads in battleground districts with headlines like "She lied. We paid." They painted her as a circus act, a bomb thrower with no proof. But the flash drive was real. The metadata was real. The voices scrubbing logs, delaying uploads were real. And her resolve that was becoming harder to bend. Later that evening, as she and her team huddled for a strategy session, she placed a single post-it on the whiteboard above the timeline chart. It read, "Torch Fear." She didn't explain it. She didn't need to. They were in it now not just to expose a lie, but to defend the very idea that truth still mattered. The folder was thinner this time, but the weight it carried was undeniable. AOC stood at the end of the table, voice composed, posture anchored like she'd rehearsed this in the mirror of 100 mornings. She placed the folder on the mahogany, slid it forward slowly, and cleared her throat. "Madam Chair," she began, eyes steady. "I move to issue a subpoena to Ms. Colleen Raskin, subcontractor employed by North Bay Intelligence, whose voice has been identified in the March 12th recording and whose correspondence with Mr. Patel predates sworn statements given to this committee." A few murmurs rippled through the room, staffers leaning into one another, committee members thumbing their phones for cues from party leadership. Raskin. That name hadn't appeared publicly yet, but the audio, it was damning. A woman's voice advising delete the local access log. Just the local. He said to keep the cloud intact. The room chilled by overhead LEDs, and bureaucratic tension felt somehow hotter than ever. The chair, a silver-haired moderate with a knack for straddling both parties like a tightrope, nodded. Motion is noted. We move to a vote. Roll call commenced. The names fell into predictable rhythm. Repish Lansing, nay. Rep Delaney, nay. Repish Holloway, aye. Rep Shin, aye. A tie was forming fast. 5-5, then 6-6. All eyes turned to the chair. She paused, not the calculated pause of a seasoned actor, but the honest hesitation of someone who understood this wasn't procedural anymore. This was a fracture line, and her gavel could shape which way it cracked. AOC didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence was the argument. The public was watching. History might be too. The chair drew in a breath, looked down, and gently tapped the wood. "Let her speak," she said. The effect wasn't immediate applause, but something more powerful breath, held then released across the room. A shift. The permission of truth. Across from AOC, Kash Patel didn't flinch, but his fingers curled tighter around his legal pad. He whispered something to his counsel. No smile this time. No chuckle. Just calculation. Outside the chamber, reporters scrambled like bees to the hive. Raskin, subpoenaed in Patel inquiry, hit the ticker within minutes. Twitter lit up. AOC's name trended. Again. But back inside, the moment stayed sacred. Not for the cameras. Not for the political winds. But because one sentence had broken a wall. Let her speak. It echoed louder than anyone had expected. The room had been rearranged. Not for comfort, but for caution. Thick black curtains were drawn across the north wall of the chamber. A screen had been installed behind the witness chair, opaque enough to conceal identity, but not presence. A faint silhouette appeared as the doors closed and the cameras turned toward the dais. Security officers had been briefed, rebriefed, and stationed at every entrance. Nobody wanted to admit how serious it had become, but everyone knew. AOC adjusted her microphone. "Mr. Chairman, the committee recognizes L. Brandon Kim, technical subcontractor, formerly assigned to North Bay Intelligence under the Federal Communications Audit Program." A murmur passed. Not many had heard the name before, but they would now. From behind the screen, a voice came, measured, male, mid-30s, perhaps tinged with nerves, but grounded by something deeper, resolve. "Yes, that's correct. My name is L. Brandon Kim. I'm appearing behind this barrier due to concerns for personal safety. I've been advised that disclosure of what I witnessed may provoke retaliation." A pause. A quiet cough from somewhere in the gallery. Then he continued. "On March 11, 2025, I received a message from Mr. Kash Patel's encrypted account. It instructed me and two other contractors to begin a process known internally as Purge Light, a protocol designed to wipe non-primary backups without triggering compliance flags." Patel, seated 2 rows behind his attorney, did not move, but his eyes were fixed on the screen. The specific directive, Kim went on, was to eliminate server-side shadow copies and redundant backup logs from March 11 through March 13. That includes access logs, user session mirrors, and transfer logs involving a second-party device ID. I pushed back. I asked for clarification, reminded them that scrubbing logs outside the main compliance window violated audit integrity standards. "And what did Mr. Patel say in response?" AOC asked, her voice calm but clipped. There was a pause. He said, "Delay is death. Clean the trail or I'll find someone else who will." Even through the screen, the weight of the moment settled across the room like dust. No one shuffled papers. No one checked their phones. "You're sure it was Mr. Patel?" another committee member asked. "Yes." I confirmed the signature on the signal key and cross-referenced his voice during an internal call 2 days later. "I have copies. The data's been submitted to this committee through secure channels." The chair leaned forward, visibly unsettled. "And why are you coming forward now, Mr. Kim?" Another pause. "Because when the truth feels heavier than your own name, you stop carrying the name," he said, "and start carrying the truth." That sentence lingered longer than any legal objection might have. In the row behind the dais, Patel whispered to his lawyer again. This time his face was visibly red. He scribbled something, quickly handed it off. The aide who took it left the room. AOC didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply turned back to the microphone. "Thank you, Mr. Kim, for your courage. The committee recognizes the personal risk you've taken, and we intend to ensure your safety." As the witness exited behind closed doors, escorted by federal protection officers, one phrase seemed to follow him out, like a quiet benediction from the room itself, carry the truth. And for the first time, Patel's hands weren't steady. The air in the committee chamber was stale now, thick not with heat, but with the aftershock of L. Brandon Kim's testimony. No one was speaking. No one dared. The silence was not empty. It was full of memory, of anticipation, of dread. Every chair seemed heavier. Every eye was trained forward. The chair gave a quiet nod. AOC leaned into her microphone and said only 4 words, "Let's hear the recording." From a speaker mounted just beneath the chamber seal, a low click crackled through. Then the sound of a muffled voice, uncertain at first, then sharpening like a blade sliding free from leather. "They'll chase shadows if we're fast." The voice was unmistakable. Kash Patel. No aliases, no distortion. Just him, clear as confession. The words hovered mid-air for half a second. Then the gallery exhaled in unison. Gasps, followed by sharp whispers. Reporters turned to each other, eyes wide, pens frozen mid-stroke. A man in the second row clutched the armrest as though bracing for impact. A woman behind him mouthed silently, "Oh my God." AOC let it hang there. She didn't add commentary. She didn't need to. The audio was doing all the work. And Patel wasn't laughing now. He sat still, almost statue-like. But his right leg betrayed him. It bounced once beneath the table, subtle but unmissable. His attorney leaned in, whispering quickly, too quickly. Patel raised a hand slightly, then dropped it. His face was drained of its usual arrogance, replaced by something far less familiar. Recognition. Of consequence. AOC gestured toward the clerk. "Can we replay the last 7 seconds?" The room fell back into stillness. Click. Static. And then, "They'll chase shadows if we're fast." Click. "Is that your voice, Mr. Patel?" she asked, turning slowly in his direction, her voice low but unwavering. He didn't answer. His attorney began to speak, but AOC didn't yield the floor. "The committee isn't asking for interpretation, just a simple answer, yes or no." Still, Patel remained silent. His gaze shifted not toward her, but toward the floor. "The American people are watching," she added. "They deserve honesty, Mr. Patel. They deserve more than delay and deception." Again, nothing. But this time the silence was louder than anything he could have said. One of the junior members leaned into her mic. "Madam Chair, I move that the committee formally request perjury review." That sent another wave through the room. Not audible, but visible. Phones lit up in the press box. Hands moved quickly, texting, scribbling, whispering. Patel finally spoke, but not to the committee. "To his attorney, we need to step out." His voice cracked. The chair raised his hand. "Mr. Patel, you may request a recess, but the committee will remain in session." And then it happened. AOC reached for another document in her folder, but before she could unfold it, Patel stood. Not defiantly, not to grandstand. He stood the way a man does when the walls are closing in and he's out of exits. "We're done here," he muttered, but no one moved. Not yet. AOC looked up, not to chase him, but to mark the moment. "No, Mr. Patel," she said calmly. "We're just getting started." And in that instant, under the quiet hum of the chamber lights, the room didn't just fall silent, it went cold. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam her fist. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez simply leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Patel's, and asked the one question that would echo far beyond the marble walls of that committee chamber. "If you could delete the logs, what else could you delete?" No one breathed. For a full beat, the question hung in the air. Rhetorical, yes, but devastating all the same. Even Patel blinked as if he hadn't anticipated that angle. As if despite the mounting evidence, he still believed he could steer the conversation. But that question, so simple, so surgical, sliced clean through every defense he'd rehearsed. The chair looked toward AOC. Even he seemed to feel it. This wasn't just a clever line, it was a pivot. The moment the story changed. In the press gallery, the first murmurs started before she'd even sat back in her chair. A producer from a major network mouthed to her assistant clip that another reporter scribbled it word for word and underlined it twice. A third quietly stood up and slipped out to call the evening news desk. By that night, the soundbite was everywhere. If you could delete the logs, what else could you delete? It led every cable network's opening segment. CNN looped it 5 times over dramatic stills of Patel's expression. MSNBC put the line in their chyron in all caps. Even conservative outlets scrambling to reframe the narrative couldn't ignore the power of the moment. On talk radio, it was dissected, debated, replayed on the hour. And by morning, it had a life of its own. The hashtag Josh what else did he delete trended on X, Facebook, even Instagram stories. People who had never watched a congressional hearing were suddenly replaying the 14-second clip. Vietnam veterans, teachers, nurses, retirees, Gen Z TikTokers, they all asked it in their own voice. What else did he delete? What else did he think he could delete? If they can erase evidence, what can't they erase? For every edited document, now there was a meme. For every missing file, a demand. Parents posted about lost school records. Veterans wrote about VA files that conveniently vanished. Librarians dug up redacted public grants. Tech workers shared code jokes, 404, truth not found. In a suburban kitchen in St. Louis, a woman rewound the clip for her teenage daughter and said, "This is what accountability looks like. You speak the truth and sometimes the world listens." In a barber shop in Baltimore, a man slapped the countertop and laughed, "Man, she hit him with that truth bomb, that's checkmate." But AOC wasn't celebrating. Not yet. She sat quietly in her office that evening, the clip muted on her screen, watching herself ask the question over and over. She knew this kind of moment could shift tides, but she also knew that moments fade. And systems, real rotting systems, don't fall from one good headline. Still, something was different. Calls had flooded her staff's voicemail system, over 3,000 in one day. Her email inbox was stretching server limits. Even some of her moderate colleagues had begun texting cautiously worded notes of support, because they felt it too. The question wasn't about Patel anymore. It was about all the other rooms where logs were deleted, timelines shifted, and accountability dodged like a game. If you could delete the logs, and what else could you delete? In a world built on fragile truths, that question hit like a wrecking ball. And for the first time, the foundation beneath Patel's confidence began to quake. The lawsuit dropped like a thunderclap filed in the Southern District Court before dawn, with Patel's legal team alleging malicious character assassination, reputational damage, and coordinated defamation by a sitting congresswoman. It was swift, precise, media-ready. By the time Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped out of her apartment in Queens, the networks were already on it. A CNN analyst called it a last-ditch attempt to silence accountability. A Fox commentator dubbed it a necessary legal response to a partisan smear campaign. Across the dial, headlines multiplied like sparks on dry brush. But AOC, she didn't blink. That evening, she stood in front of a packed town hall at PS 184 in Jackson Heights, her district, her home. No teleprompter, no podium, just a handheld mic, a folding chair behind her, and the hum of restless, anxious voters. She let the noise settle. Then she spoke. "He says this is defamation," she began, her tone measured calm. "But this isn't defamation. It's definition of character." A pause. The words hung there deliberate and unshaken. "It is the public's right to know who governs in their name. And when someone manipulates timelines, conceals communications, and obstructs the truth, we're not destroying their reputation. They're defining it themselves with every deleted log, every nervous smirk, every lawsuit meant to intimidate rather than explain." The crowd stirred. A retired postal worker stood up in the back and shouted, "You tell him, Alexandria." Laughter followed, then applause, then a rising chant, "Truth first, truth first." She raised a hand not to silence them, but to anchor the moment. "This isn't about left or right anymore," she said. "It's about whether we accept a system where corruption gets to sue its way out of consequence." The line would echo across the news cycle for the next 48 hours. That night, every major network clipped and broadcast the town hall. Fox News aired the clip with a defiant or delusional banner. MSNBC aired it under AOC Hits Back. Even NPR gave it 2 full minutes of sober reflection, comparing the moment to Watergate-era committee hearings. But it wasn't just cable and national radio anymore. Local stations across America began picking it up. In Boise, a conservative AM talk host asked listeners whether defamation lawsuits should silence elected oversight. In Savannah, a retired judge told a public radio host, "The moment you sue the question asker is the moment you've already answered the question." Online memes flooded in again. A now viral image of AOC speaking with her hand on her chest had the caption, "This isn't defamation, it's definition." The phrase began to appear on t-shirts, bumper stickers, even protest signs in front of federal buildings. Hashtag surge, chakra defined by truth. Chaners sue the system, not the question. One, what else did he delete, all coalescing into a single unmistakable wave. But beneath the noise, AOC's team saw what mattered most. Patel wasn't trying to clear his name. He was trying to shift the battlefield from evidence to emotion, from truth to tactics. He couldn't stop the recording or the subcontractor's testimony. But maybe he could cast enough doubt sling, enough legal chaos to make the public forget the core question. What else did he delete back in Washington? Committee members whispered about pressure from above, funders, party leaders, quiet phone calls asking whether this had all gone too far. But Alexandria didn't flinch. She knew storms come when light breaks through, and she had no intention of stepping out of the rain, because some truths are worth getting soaked for. The envelope arrived without a name, just a return address from Arlington, Virginia, and a single word typed on the seal, confidential. Inside was an affidavit printed cleanly on cream-colored legal stock. The signature at the bottom was sharp, practiced, and unexpected. Ronald K. Drexler, former legislative liaison, 2 decades on the Hill, known within the GOP ranks as loyal, methodical, unshakable. He had worked under 3 different Republican speakers. If Capitol Hill were a cathedral of silence and survival, Drexler was one of its monks. Now he was breaking the vow. The statement was clear. In it, Drexler swore under penalty of perjury that he had witnessed direct coordination between the Office of Strategic Operations and outside subcontractors regarding metadata suppression efforts, and that those efforts began before March 15th. It lined up precisely with AOC's questioning her timeline and the recordings in dispute. Patel's defense just sprang a leak from inside the ship. But Drexler didn't stop there. He named names, time-stamped emails, and attached 2 preserved memos, one of which had Patel's digital signature authorizing a document expurgation strategy memo as early as March 11th. By midnight, AOC had confirmed the identity. By dawn, she was riding in a discreet black sedan toward a diner in Foggy Bottom, just 10 blocks from where Drexler used to shape floor votes. He was already seated in the back booth, crisp navy blazer, tie loosened slightly, hands folded over a white ceramic mug that had long since gone cold. He stood when she approached. "A little late in the game for coffee, Mr. Drexler," she said, sliding in across from him. He offered a tired smile. "I haven't slept well in 20 years. This won't change much." They sat in silence for a moment. The buzz of a fluorescent light above them was the only sound. "You don't strike me as someone who flips," AOC said carefully. He looked at her longer than was comfortable, and then leaned forward. "I didn't flip. I just finally stopped flinching." She waited. "I've watched every trick in the book," he continued, voice low. "I've drafted some of them. Watched good people get crushed for asking questions. But this one's different. You asked a question nobody else would. You held steady when even your own side asked you not to. I thought, maybe it's time someone from ours did the same." AOC blinked slowly. Why now? He didn't hesitate. Because I saw what they did to the truth. They didn't just dodge it, they dragged it, kicked it until people couldn't even recognize it anymore. "I'm not here to save face. I've already lost mine. I'm here to clear the path." She nodded, not out of agreement, but acknowledgement, that she understood the weight of what he'd just placed on the table between them. "This affidavit," she said, tapping the copy gently, "it's going to shake the floor." Drexler shrugged. "Then I hope it cracks the right doors open." They parted without ceremony, no handshake, no press. Just a quiet exchange of truth across party lines, a rarity like spotting lightning and hearing thunder at the same time. That night, AOC returned to her office and reread the statement under the desk lamp, every word growing louder in her mind. This wasn't about party anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about the war between what people were allowed to say and what they needed to say. And finally, someone from the other side had chosen the latter. The hearing room had heard many speeches over the years, some calculated, some impassioned, most forgettable. But the air on this day was charged with something different. There was no clamor, no whispering, not even the clicking of pens. Just a heavy collective stillness. Cameras rolled. Phones were out. Reporters leaned forward knowing instinctively this was not routine. AOC adjusted the microphone with steady hands. Her voice when it came was calm but unmistakably clear, each syllable ringing with an edge that cut through the pretense of politics and landed directly where it needed to, in the conscience of a nation. If silence protects liars, she began, then my voice no longer belongs to me. It belongs to the people. A pause, then she looked directly at Patel, not with fury but with a steadiness that unnerved him more. We are not here today because of policy disagreements. We're here because someone drew a line and then tried to erase it before anyone else could see. And I refuse to pretend that line wasn't there. She turned briefly toward her colleagues. I understand that the truth is inconvenient. I understand it's expensive. But the price of cowardice is paid by people who never signed the check. Some shifted in their seats. Others avoided eye contact. Let me be very clear, this is not about left or right. It is about wrong. And the question that history will ask of each of us is simple: when it mattered most, did you speak, or did you stay quiet because it was easier? No theatrics, no grand gestures. Just truth spoken plainly enough that it echoed far beyond the walls of the committee. By that evening, the clip had gone viral. It started on C-SPAN, then hit Twitter, then cable news. Within hours, it was the top post on Reddit, the lead segment on MSNBC, and the closing monologue on late-night television. Her line was everywhere. If silence protects liars, then my voice belongs to the people. Someone painted it on a wall in Brooklyn. A high school civics teacher in Colorado played it for his students. A Vietnam veteran posted it with the caption, "She said what I've waited decades to hear." And while the media swirled and social platforms exploded behind closed doors, something else happened quietly. Patel's legal team reached out to the committee counsel, not with another denial, not with another press release, but with 3 simple words: "We're open to settlement." There was no press conference, no apology, no confession. Just the unmistakable shift that happens when one voice, resolute and unbending, exposes what years of procedure had failed to reveal the truth, was never too far. It was just waiting for someone brave enough to say it out loud. And that person had finally arrived. The hearing room no longer buzzed with the same anticipation as it had in previous weeks. There were no gasps, no viral moments, no last-minute surprises. But the silence now carried a different weight, one of finality. The storm had passed. What remained was the reckoning. The committee chair, a man rarely given to emotional cadence, read from a prepared summary. His voice, though measured, held the unmistakable gravity of consequence. After reviewing submitted evidence, testimonies, metadata analysis, and sworn statements, the committee finds that Mr. Kash Patel engaged in materially misleading conduct while under oath. The words fell like a slow gavel strike, sharp, undeniable, final. Patel, seated with his attorneys to the left, didn't flinch. His face, once animated with smug dismissal and quiet arrogance, was now a mask of practiced neutrality. But his fingers tapped faintly against the polished table, a betrayal of the storm he was fighting inside. The committee's report, released to the public shortly after the session concluded, laid out a damning sequence. Though the Justice Department declined to pursue criminal charges, citing insufficient threshold for prosecutorial certainty, the report called for immediate administrative sanctions. Patel was formally banned from holding any federal advisory or contracting role for a minimum of 10 years, a move both symbolic and practical. His security clearances expired, but previously dormant were retroactively flagged. His company, once a silent recipient of government back-end contracts, was delisted from future considerations. Quietly, completely, he was exiled from the corridors he once navigated with impunity. This action is not punitive, the chair read aloud. It is corrective. Integrity and testimony is the foundation of oversight. When that is compromised, our democracy staggers, and we do not permit it to stagger uncorrected. Across the room, AOC sat poised but calm. She did not smile. There was no triumph in her expression, no gloating, just the resolute posture of someone who knew from the start that truth would take the long road, but that it would arrive nonetheless. After the session, reporters rushed to get statements. Patel's legal team issued a curt one. Mr. Patel maintains his position that no intentional falsehoods were made. He accepts the committee's administrative findings, but categorically rejects any implication of wrongdoing beyond procedural ambiguity. The public wasn't fooled. By that evening, headlines across outlets painted a unified picture. Patel sanctioned truth prevails. In oversight battle, no charges, but no return. On social media, AOC's composure and language were again praised not for theatrics, but for steadiness. A retired federal judge tweeted, "She restored the tone of accountability to a process that had forgotten its purpose." Later that night in a short press conference, AOC finally spoke. "This isn't a story about me or him. It's about process, about how lies may move quickly, but accountability always walks behind them, patient, determined." Today it caught up. No criminal sentence, no handcuffs. But in Washington, where access is power and credibility is currency, Patel had lost everything that made his name mean something. And for millions watching, especially the older Americans who had called, written, and watched every hearing, this ending wasn't flashy, but it was enough. It was fair. And in a time where truth so often loses its footing, that was everything. Days had passed since the final report was read. The headlines had begun to fade. Cable news moved on to the next crisis. But for Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the real weight of the hearing arrived not with cameras, but in the silence that followed. It came in the form of a simple brown envelope. No return address, no stamp, just slid under the door of her district office in Queens. Inside a single sheet of cream-colored paper, handwritten, the strokes slightly uneven, the corners worn as if folded and unfolded many times. She read it once, then again. "Dear Congresswoman, I don't know if this will ever reach you. I suppose that doesn't matter now. What matters is that I say this, I was scared, but I saw you weren't, and that's how I knew I wasn't alone. My name is Laura Inez. I'm the one who found that backup file in Vermont. I've spent most of my life patching old systems no one else wanted to touch. I was never brave. I just followed routines, protocols, until that day. I could have deleted it. I was supposed to. But something about it, how careful someone was trying to be unseen, made me pause. I told myself maybe someone else would do the right thing, but we both know how often no one does. I never expected it would go this far. I never expected you'd carry it all the way. I guess that's what courage is. Not loud, not showy, just steady. Thank you for being steady. Thank you for not letting the truth die quietly. And thank you for helping me find a little of that steadiness too." L. Inez AOC folded the letter slowly, her eyes lingering on the signature. It was delicate, honest. There was no fanfare, no demand for recognition. Just the quiet resolve of someone who had done the right thing and hoped in a world of noise that it had mattered. She placed the letter gently in the drawer beside her, a drawer already filled with small mementos from the fight-printed emails from constituents, scribbled notes from hearings, a photo of her and her team from the day the vote was tied and broken in her favor. This letter, though, felt different. It was the thread that stitched all the moments together. Later that afternoon, she stepped outside for a walk. The New York sun was low, brushing soft gold across the sidewalk. A crossing guard near the school recognized her, nodded, and raised a hand. Not a cheer, not a question, just acknowledgement. Respect. Two older women sitting on a bench by the corner called out, "We saw you hold your ground. We saw the whole thing." They didn't need to say more. AOC smiled and for once didn't feel the weight of having to explain, to defend, to warn. Just for a moment, she let herself be a person again, a person who had stood firm not for attention, but because someone had to. Back in her office that evening, she looked once more at Laura's letter. She thought of all the people who'd stayed silent, all the moments someone could have stepped up but didn't, and the one woman who finally did. The truth didn't break through because one person shouted. It broke through because two women, one with a flash drive, one with a microphone, chose not to back down. And when the dust settled, what remained wasn't chaos. It was clarity. The walls of the Bronx Middle School still bore chipped paint from a budget that never stretched far enough. But that morning, the auditorium felt full of energy, of hope, of something bigger than headlines and hearings. Students had gathered not for a civics lesson, but to meet someone who had lived it. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood at the front of the room. No podium, no script. Just her and 100 eyes watching closely, some wide with curiosity, others skeptical, some simply tired after a long school day. The questions had ranged from policy to personal. What inspired you? What's it like in Congress? Did you meet Beyoncé? She answered them all with grace and warmth. And then, just as the bell was about to ring, a hand rose from the back row. It belonged to a girl named Janelle, maybe 13, with tight braids and sharper eyes than most adults. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Was it worth it? The room went still. The teachers stopped rearranging their papers. Even the students stopped fidgeting. There was no need to explain what she meant. Everyone knew. The threats, the smears, the sleepless nights spent rereading testimony, the friends who told her to let it go, the weight of dragging truth up a hill built by people who hoped it stayed buried. AOC looked at the young girl for a long second, not out of surprise but respect. It was the kind of question that didn't want a slogan. It wanted an answer. She inhaled slowly, then smiled, not a political smile, but one from somewhere quieter, deeper. I think about that a lot. She began, her voice softer now. When it gets hard, really hard, it's tempting to want something immediate. A win, a headline, an apology. But life doesn't always give you those. She glanced at the teachers, the cracked ceiling tiles, then back to Janelle. So if you're asking me if it was worth the fear, the anger, the noise, my answer is, this ask me again in 10 years when you're sitting where I am. A small ripple of quiet laughter moved through the students. But Janelle didn't laugh. She nodded, and that was enough. The final bell rang. Backpacks zipped. Students filed out, some waving shyly, some snapping photos, some already returning to hallway chatter. But a feeling lingered in the air, not of a guest speaker, but of a challenge handed gently from one generation to the next. As AOC exited the school and stepped into the Bronx afternoon, a breeze picked up, the kind that carried the sounds of basketballs, buses, and children's voices down the street. Ordinary sounds, but to her they weren't background noise. They were the future's rehearsal, and somewhere inside a girl named Janelle had just started writing her first speech. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Alexandria Rising Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising Stories.